Okay, let's go c5. Let's play an accelerator. Nah, let's play Najdorf. Because I wanted to play Najdorf last game. And again, nobody seems to play the open Sicilian anymore. c4. c4. Okay, that's not a conventional move. And it's not that bad. White aims to get some sort of a Naroditsky bind structure by playing d4 on the next move. So, I don't... My memory is quite hazy on how to deal with this properly. Let's start by going knight f6. And let's try to counteract this by developing our bishop to g4 early. The idea is that if white plays d4 now, then we can take the knight on f3, and white will have to take with a pawn, which is kind of annoying. Okay, now we can play knight c6, and again, d4 is impossible because we take the knight. And then we've got two attackers on d4, and white will have only one defender, the queen. So as long as we prevent d4, we keep this a major hole, and we've got a nice position. Now, I don't think that we should play e5 here. I think some people might be tempted to do that and say, well, now we really control the d4 square. But when you play e5, you create a corresponding weakness on d5. So I think we should restrict ourselves to e6 in order to keep d5 protected. That's an important square. We could have fianchettoed also g6, bishop g7, but I think this is fine. Yeah, g6 was also fine. I think both moves are totally acceptable. e6, bishop e7, g6, bishop g7. Okay, d4. So white loses his patience. It's funny that he waited so long and then ultimately decides to blunder. Bishop takes f3, of course, was our whole point. People don't like it when their like only ideas are stopped and then they panic. So we're going to be up a pawn. Okay, now what should we take with this? This is an important moment. I will preface this by saying, no, I think there is a correct answer. I think both captures are fine, but I think we should take with the pawn. And the reason has nothing to do with the fact that it attacks white's knight. The fact that it carries a threat is less important. But if you look a little bit further, I think the good thing about pawn takes is that we can then play the move e5, and we literally have a protected extra passer in the center of the board. That's a huge deal. Now, knight takes d4 is good conceptually. It's good from the perspective of keeping control over the d4 square. But if you look very carefully, I think white has a very annoying resource in response to knight takes d4. I'll let you guys find it after the game. But let's take cd. There is a specific move that I'm worried about after knight takes d4. And some of you already found it. It is e5. Yes, it is e5. Okay, so cd. The knight has to move back, then we go e5. And once we go e5, we're up a pawn. The bishop is lame. And we are much, much better. Close to winning. Okay, e5 anyway. Wow. That's a bold move. Okay, so we shouldn't pay... I mean, that's a bad move. That's a bad move. We can do basically whatever we want. I mean, we can play d takes e5 simply and snag a second pawn. But let's try to be clinical here. I mean, we're at the level where precision has become very, very important. So let's not do anything drastic. The one thing we should not do is we shouldn't take on e5 with a knight, because then white takes on d4 with the queen. And then you might say, well, wait a second, can't we take the bishop in that position? Well, you can, but why? It's not worth giving up a pawn over ruining white's kingside pawn structure. It's just not worth it. Yeah, d takes c5 is clean. Tight. Yeah, d takes c5 is clean, but I like a different move. I actually like dc. I like dc. The point is, after ef, bishop f6, white is not only down 2 pawns, but lands in even more trouble. The b2 pawn is hanging with a fork, and bc, bishop takes c3, forks the 2 rooks. So this is likely to lead to more simplifications, which I like because we're up 2 pawns. And I just don't feel like white has an adequate response to this. Yeah, that's an important point. If white plays b3, notice that we have the move c2, exposing the attack on the rook, discovered attack. No, but that's simple calculation. And I'm making an intuitive judgment call. This position just looks horrendous for white. I would call this clinical. I think it merits that label. I don't see a move for white. I just don't see a move for white. I think, okay, rook b1, that is the best. I think that's probably the only move, actually. Oh yeah, that is a very good move. I would go so far as to say that I missed that move. And had I seen it, it probably would have changed my mind on what we should have played. That's annoying. because that basically forces us to liquidate. We'll take our 2 extra pawns, no problem, but that's quite a bummer. I forgot about rook b1. Now we should take here. We should simplify. Even we can pre-move bishop b2, whatever. Scrap the video. Next video, yeah. No, it totally escaped me that for some reason I thought that white has to defend the pawn of the queen, and then we had tactics with knight d4, which I'll show after the game. So mistake there. Should have played d. We'll check with the engine, but I'm okay. What is this? I mean, our opponent's not recapturing any pawns. Okay, so we need to prioritize here. What is our top priority in this position? What is the priority? And our priority dictates what move we should play. So knight d4 is interesting, but it does give up b7 to castle. Our priority is to castle, right? If we castle, then everything is safe. We're up a bunch of pawns. So I think a lot of people here would react instinctively to the d6 pawn being hanging. And you would say, well, let's play e5 or let's play knight d4. But all of that is very complicated. The simplest is just to castle kingside. Yeah, we give up d6 with tempo. Big deal. BFD. We just go rook e8. Okay, c5. This is nothing. We can circumvent this. This is not a problem. At least we've castled now. And we don't have to worry about our king. And we can focus on converting our 2 extra pawns. Okay. So while this is not a problem, the pieces I've highlighted, they are annoying. So ideally, we would like to successfully deal with the dark squared bishop, and we would like to deal with it without giving up our b2 pawn. So we should keep our bishop on f6. Now you might say, well, okay, how do we deal with the bishop on d6? Well, why is the bishop on d6 annoying? Well, it's annoying because there's a pawn on c5, right, that's supporting that bishop. That's where the source of annoyance comes from. So you might say, well, I want to play b6. But you can't play b6 because the knight on c6 is hanging. So then you might say, well, okay, what if we defend the knight on c6 first? And that's where I come up with the move rook c8. We want to play b6 and undermine the support of this bishop. Once the bishop loses its support, it becomes a sitting duck. Yeah, queen a5 was tempting, but I will show why I didn't like it afterward. Hopefully the logic was clear. Bishop e4. Bishop e4. What does our opponent want? Probably wants some sort of shenanigans with queen h5, but queen h5 is not a problem. I'm pretty sure we can proceed with our plan. Yeah, I don't see. So the one thing you would have to be careful of, b6 does loosen the knight, right? It loosens it. So you would have to check for various forks and double attacks and stuff like that. White has a move like queen a4 here, which could potentially be annoying. We could move our queen up to d7 if necessary to reinforce the knight again. But you would want to be careful about that, Queen a4 played. Okay, so it's important to point out that bc is wrong. Why is it wrong? It's wrong because if bishop takes c6. And if you take the bishop on d6, the rook on e8 is hanging. So in fact, I think queen d7 is quite important, supporting the knight on c6. And finally, we are ready to remove the pawn on c5. And once it's removed, I can guarantee you that white's position is going to collapse like a house of cards. Because white's only asset in this position is that bishop on d6. All right, get out of here. We are not afraid of any discoveries. There is nothing, right? There's no, yeah, bishop takes. Okay, now where should we put our queen? And I have to give our opponent a lot of credit. He's defending as well as he could be. Well, I don't like queen b7, right? Why walk into a pin? You want to eliminate potential sources of trouble. And queen b7 potentially walks into a move like rook d6. And I actually think that might win the knight. So queen c7 is very important here. Yeah, it's actually the only move. My guess is that he might return to d6. But then we can sort of circle around. We can circle back to b6. Yeah, Jen Psaki would make that move. I think we're safe. Yep. There we go. Okay, queen b6. Well, we are in good shape. Notice that all throughout this entire operation, we've kept the bishop on f6 in order to support the pawn on b2. This is, you know, we need to support this pawn with everything that we've got. It's like the golden fleece. It's the pride of our position. We cannot give this pawn up. Yeah, white is starting to shoot blanks. That's right. You can sense that white's initiative is fizzling out, and once it's our turn, you know, the win is going to come very, very quickly. So what we do next depends quite heavily on what white does. Rook d3. Okay, does this create a threat? I don't think so. We're never really worried about these kinds of moves because we can always play g6. Okay, so what should we do? This is an instructive moment, because I think a lot of people here would just sort of get lost and not realize, you know, like what specifically should we do? Thank you, Nanime, for the raid. We have a very, very strong move here. We have a very, very strong move. Now, what do I notice in this position? Okay, I notice a couple of things. The moment that rook d3 is played, the first thing that I notice is that it weakens the back rank. And if we can get a rook to c1, well, that wouldn't be checkmate because the rook could come back to d1, but that would be a big deal. Now, what do we need in order to get the rook to c1? Well, we probably need to move the knight. So you start thinking, okay, well, where can I put the knight? And hopefully you also notice that the queen is x-raying the bishop. What is the bishop defended by? Well, why did we play b6? We played it in order to make the bishop more vulnerable. So let's make a move that exploits the vulnerability of that bishop, but it's not knight e5. Knight e5 is a one-move threat that doesn't do all that much if the rook just moves back. Right? That's not how you attack the bishop. You attack the bishop by intercepting the rook and the bishop. You play knight d4. And this simultaneously creates several threats. First of all, you're attacking the bishop. Second of all, rook c1 is very annoying, although we should be very careful about making that move because now white's queen is making contact with that rook, something we should notice. But there is a third threat here, which is the reason I played this move. Does anybody see it? This is virtually unstoppable. I think white has a very strong move here, actually, to stop it, but it's almost unstoppable. Does anybody see the third threat we have? Look carefully. Knight e2 check, and knight back to c3, forking the queen and the rook on b1. That is the third threat. Knight e2, knight c3. How do I see this? Well, anytime queen and the rook are in forkable positions. I mean, this is just tactical pattern recognition. There's no science to this. The science is just pattern recognition. You just need to see the fork. I mean, it's the kind of thing you either see or you don't. Okay. So, white is lost. Yeah, Mr. White. Yeah, science. What if the d3 rook takes the knight? Yeah, but we don't need to move this rook at all. The point is that we will take the rook on d4. Oh, you're asking if the rook takes here. Well, no, our bishop will take. Yeah, that's a great question. What he was saying is that it's very important, again, that the bishop also controls c3. Because otherwise, indeed, the rook would have taken. So, one thing that you can notice, and white resigns, one thing that you can notice is that the margins of our wins are a little bit more narrow. Like, I'm relying more heavily on specific calculation, where if one line doesn't work, it's actually a problem. Whereas in earlier games, like, you know, there are like 15 different wins in most positions. Good game. So let's go over it. So c4 has been played against me once. It's not a bad move. I mean, it's a move. You know, it's a third-rate sideline. Why is c4 even played? Well, if you play as one would a Najdorf, right? If you play a move a6, for example, then white's going to play d4 and get kind of a favorable Naroditsky bind structure. This, by the way, is the reason why it is considered inaccurate to play a6 here first, right? This is why in the Najdorf, black starts with knight f6 and then plays a6. This was taught to me a very long time ago. a6 allows the extra option of c4, which controls the center more tightly. Now, if you've allowed this, the best that black can do in a situation like this is to set up what's called a hedgehog setup. I'm sure that most people in the chat, probably if you've been in chess long enough, you've heard of that term. Now, the hedgehog setup refers to a very specific arrangement of pieces that is frequently played against kind of a Naroditsky setup. And it is characterized by the following arrangement of minor pieces. You play e6. The order doesn't matter right now. I'm like just showing you the moves. You play queen c7, b6, bishop b7, and knight bd7. This is the hedgehog structure. So it's characterized by a sort of Scheveningen pawn formation, and then 4 of these pieces on the 7th rank: the queen, the bishop, the knight, and the other bishop. So this is what characterizes the hedgehog: the pawns and the pieces. Now, Sergei Shipov, noted Russian commentator and GM, has written like a 500-page book on the hedgehog. It's an incredibly complicated structure. It first started to get popular around the 70s. My former coach, Lev Psakis, popularized the hedgehog in like the late 70s, early 80s. And the interesting thing about the hedgehog is that it can be played against a lot of different structures. White can set up his pieces, his or her pieces, in many different ways. So the hedgehog is more of a setup than it is an actual one. It's not actually one line. But it can lead to some beautiful wins and incredible ideas for black. One game that I remember in the hedgehog that could give you a pretty good impression of like the way that it's played. Hopefully this is interesting. I mean, this is a bit of a detour into a line that most people won't play, but I think just general chess education is important. Just educating yourself on things that are out there is important, because you can always borrow ideas, and just being knowledgeable, I think, in across different openings that you don't play is just good in general. It's just being educated in a chess context. Yeah, there have been some famous Kasparov-Karpov games in the hedgehog, but one slightly less famous game that I really, really like is this one. Taimanov against Yusupov, 2 Soviet GMs. So you can see 1982, at this point, the hedgehog is becoming like pretty damn popular. So you can see here, yep, they get this structure. So there's e6, a6, knight, bishop, queen. Okay, black delays queen c7 and then plays it. Okay, so here black applies a super popular hedgehog idea. You play queen b8, bishop d8, and bishop c7. Super, super typical hedgehog idea. You defend b6, and then you aim at the h2 pawn, which can become important if black breaks through with d5 later. And in the hedgehog, like, black has these 2 pawn breaks, b5 and d5, that white needs to be very, very careful and vigilant about watching. So in this position, Yusupov applies an idea, and I remember reading Yusupov's commentary to this game. And what's amazing about the idea that Yusupov carries out in this position is that he learned it directly from Robert Fischer. Fischer had a game. Fischer had a game against Ulf Andersson in an Olympiad 10 years before the current one was played, in which Fischer applies this incredible idea. And it's generally considered that Fischer was the first to apply this idea. Just a second. So I'll show you the full order of operations here. Fischer plays this crazy idea in the 70s, and then Yusupov applies it in his own game. So here's the Fischer game. Here's the Fischer game. Yeah, so Fischer from 1970. Fischer plays the reverse hedgehog. So he plays the hedgehog structure, but he plays it with the white pieces. And you can see the hedgehog. And here Fischer does something crazy. He goes king h1. Then he goes rook g1. Anderson is like, la-di-da, improving my pieces. And then knight e4, and then g4. Like, he starts pushing this kingside pawn. Then he doubles on the g file, and he just checkmates him. He just checkmates him. Knight h4, and then knight f5. Look at this. Knight f5. Bang. If you take it, then gf, bishop f5, rook g7. Oh, let me give up the queen for 2 pieces. No, knight f6 first. Then I take your rook, queen, and then the other rook. Just incredible power. Then the other knight gets to c5, so he just destroys him. And Fischer ends up winning. You can look at this game in its entirety on your own. But back we go to the Taimanov game. What did Yusupov do in this position? Who can tell me? Who can tell me what Yusupov played in this position? Yeah, Ulf Andersson was very young. He was sub 20, I think. Yeah, he plays king h8. Then he plays rook g8. Then he plays g5. And then he plays rook g6. He literally applies the idea move for move. And then he plays beautifully. He gets the queen around to the king side, pushes g4, bang, bang. And then he gets the bishop around to h4. The attack rages on, and then he wins a pawn. Takes here, and then takes white's central pawn out of the picture, and he ends up winning the game. This is part of the this is part of the YouTube video. So just a beautiful win. So that's enough. But to go back to what I'm saying, to conclude, so a6 here would not have been a mistake, but it would have allowed white to get into the hedgehog pawn structure. Yeah, the engine is okay with a hedgehog. It's not refuted or anything. Okay, so bishop g4. Again, the point of this move is aimed against d4. You know, we want to take on f3 here, and we want to force white to play gf, which is quite undesirable. Then we go knight c6, and we're in pretty good shape. Okay, does that make sense? So bishop e2, knight c6, castles e6. I think black is already slightly better. I think white probably should have played d4, because at this point, this gaping hole on d4 is no good for white. Okay, rook e1 is weird. Yeah, and then d4 blunders the pawn. The way white should play this is white should play d3. d3, bishop e3, maybe prepare d4. Yeah, white should prepare d4. And the game, you know, probably still closer to equality than to anything else. The d4, we take it. Okay, so why didn't I play knight takes d4? The reason is because of this move, e5, which I found to be quite annoying, because we've exposed our backside. The pawn on b7 is exposed. So if we take on e5, then white can take b7, and I thought this was a little bit unconvincing. But if we take on f3, then white takes on f3, and then again takes on b7. And again, black is better, but I wasn't too convinced by this. I'm quite positive the CD is just better. Okay, so e5. E5 is obviously panic, very bad. And here I made a mistake, definitely. DC is misjudgment. The best move was just DE. And this pawn mass is just going to destroy white. Okay, knight e4 maybe keeps some chances alive. If white plays knight back to e2, then we have e4. Yeah, knight e4. I thought this wasn't like totally super convincing because this bishop is annoying. And white is threatening to take on c6 and take on e5. So I just wasn't like 100% sold on this. And so for this reason, I took here and then took back. Okay. If bishop takes knight, we take it. What's the issue here? Because the knight is still hanging, so you can't take on e5, right? Okay. So, anyways, we took on c3, we took back on f6, and I just forgot about rook b1. Somebody asked in the chat why rook b1 is so strong. It's less that it's like strong per se; it just defends against the threat of cb. And the additional problem is that if we just sort of nonchalantly simplify, then after rook takes b2, the rook is perfectly positioned to attack black's only weakness, b7. And I found this to be very unconvincing. White actually gets quite the initiative here. Okay, maybe queen c7 and black is just okay, but I didn't want to allow this. So that's why we went... Oh, no, I did want to allow this. I played cb. Sorry. This is the line I was going to go for, but I was worried about this position. Although I think black can castle on the next move. I actually think we're fine. So like this exists, but here at the end we just go rook c8 and I think we're fine. I don't see a clear move for white. If like queen b1, and then we go rook b8 and we defend b7, that's fine. Did we have to take b2 in the first place? Asks Bonsai Grow. No, well, no, but what do you propose instead? I mean, if we had castled instead, the good thing about CB is that it forces white to give up the bishop pair. Here I was worried about BC. Because the pawn on b7 hangs. And if we take on c3 and you say, yeah, but the rook hangs. Yeah, but the rook can move up to e3 and attack the bishop again. So it's not so simple. Bishop d4, rook d3. And then the bishop hangs, and then if you move the bishop back, then the pawn hangs. And white's bishops are good. And if you go bishop c5, then the other pawn hangs. So whichever way you slice it, you're going to lose a pawn here. So that's why I played cb. Okay, bishop f4 is pretty wild. Yeah, and here we decided to castle. Was kc4 to threaten a fork an option? What do you mean by kc4? Where, and I don't understand where you're talking about it. Sorry. Was knight b4? Oh, here. Yeah. So knight b4, you can give a check on a4 and force the knight back, and that's a disaster because then white can take. Anytime your king is uncastled, remember, you have to look at this fork. Okay, so cb, bishop f4, castles. So we sacrifice one of our pawns back, but we've castled. And after c5, I think an instructive moment where we just basically decided on what the top priority was and then came up with an idea to carry out our plan, right? So we start by saying the bishop is white's strongest piece. We want to get rid of it, but it's not easy to get rid of it because bishop e7 would blunder the pawn on b2. A lot of you wanted to go queen a5, but after queen b3, I wasn't exactly sure how black should proceed. This is the move that I feared quite a bit. The problem is that the b7 pawn hangs, and yeah, I'll get to e5 in a second, but you can't play rook b8. That really hurts you. The fact that we can't play rook b8 really hurts us. So I wasn't sure exactly what we would do here. Knight d4, we go queen b7. And white as a passer, like why are we allowing all of this, right? So I just thought it was simpler and more safe to go rook c8. Okay, so e5, why would you go e5? I mean, e5 doesn't accomplish anything. It also weakens, as you're saying, the light squares. And not to mention that it cuts off the connection between the bishop and the pawn. Okay. Then knight c2 and knight a3. Well, let's analyze. So here, you want here, here. Yeah, maybe, because knight a3 is coming next. Yeah, it's possible that this was good. Yep. Yeah, maybe this is good for black, but I don't know. I was too lazy to calculate, I guess. So now we go b6. We undermine the bishop. Oh, sorry. Keep doing that. Queen a4 attacking the knight. Queen d7 defending the knight. Getting rid of the pawn. Sliding the queen over to c7. The queen circles around to b6, and now we intercept the bishop with knight d4. Bang, bang, bang. Easy. Very, very easy. Yeah, short game, but a lot of interesting moments. So hopefully you enjoyed. Yeah, so bishop b4 I thought would prolong the game. I mean, white resigned, but bishop b4 would have kept white in the game. So here I was intending to play rook e to d8. The point is to get the rook away from the queen's contact with it. And after rook takes b2, you have the move rook c1 check, rook d1, and now knight e2 check. It's simple tactics. And then the rook is toast, and black-white is mated. Yeah, a lot of meat there to unpack.